Tonight, we travel to a lonely homestead on the 19th century American frontier as the last autumn light fades across an unfamiliar landscape. A pioneer family stands outside its small home, watching the northern sky for the first signs of a winter that may last for months. The nearest store could be many miles away, the roads might soon disappear beneath snow, and no modern forecast could warn them what was coming. Their survival would depend upon the strength of their shelter, the food in their cellar, the fuel beside their wall, and the health of their animals. A single unfinished roof, damaged chimney, spoiled barrel, or neglected illness could grow into a crisis after the first heavy storm. Winter tested every decision made during spring, summer, and autumn, when families planted crops, preserved food, cut wood, repaired tools, and prepared clothing. The cold itself was dangerous, but isolation, hunger, fire, disease, exhaustion, and accidents often created even greater threats. Families survived not through rugged courage alone, but through planning, cooperation, practical knowledge, neighborly assistance, and occasional good fortune. Even those who prepared carefully understood that one unusually long winter could consume supplies intended to last until the next harvest. As snow begins to gather outside the cabin, let us enter quietly and discover how pioneer families endured the harshest season of the year. The first defense against winter was a shelter capable of resisting wind, snow, rain, and temperatures that could remain below freezing for days. In wooded regions, settlers constructed log cabins, filling spaces between the logs with clay, mud, moss, stones, or other available materials. Across treeless plains, families sometimes built houses from thick blocks of prairie sod that provided surprisingly effective insulation against extreme temperatures. Other settlers used adobe, stone, timber frames, dugouts, or combinations of materials shaped by local resources and knowledge borrowed from earlier inhabitants. A roof needed enough strength and slope to shed snow, yet leaks remained common when rain or melting ice found openings between boards and coverings. Windows were small because glass was expensive, and every opening allowed precious warmth to escape into the cold air outside. Families covered cracks with cloth, paper, animal skins, mud, or whatever material could reduce the flow of freezing wind through the walls. Beds were placed away from doors when possible, while curtains, quilts, or temporary partitions created smaller spaces that were easier to keep warm. Snow accumulating around the outside walls sometimes provided additional insulation, although deep drifts could block doors and trap people inside. A modest cabin could preserve life, but only when its residents repaired it constantly and treated every draft, leak, and loose board as a warning. The household fire provided heat, light, hot food, warm water, dry clothing, and a psychological center during the darkest days of winter. Depending on location, families burned split wood, fallen branches, coal, peat, corn cobs, dried animal dung, or any combustible material they could collect. Firewood had to be cut, transported, split, stacked, and protected from moisture long before snow made the work slower and more dangerous. A family that underestimated its fuel needs might begin burning fence rails, broken furniture, wooden tools, or parts of unused buildings before spring arrived. Someone rose during the night to add fuel because a fire allowed to die could leave water frozen and the room dangerously cold by morning. Open fireplaces lost much of their heat through the chimney, while iron stoves used fuel more efficiently but required money and transportation to obtain. Chimneys accumulated soot, sparks escaped onto roofs, and clothing drying too close to flames could ignite without warning. Cabin fires were especially destructive during winter because frozen wells, deep snow, strong wind, and distant neighbors made firefighting extremely difficult. Children learned early that the stove and fireplace offered comfort but also demanded caution, discipline, and constant adult attention. The fire protected the family from winter, yet it remained another danger that had to be controlled every hour it burned. Surviving winter required families to preserve enough food during warmer months when gardens, fields, forests, and livestock produced their greatest abundance. Vegetables were stored in cellars, buried containers, cool rooms, or outdoor pits designed to protect them from freezing, moisture, and hungry animals. Meat could be salted, smoked, dried, or preserved in fat, while fish received similar treatment in communities near rivers, lakes, and coastlines. Families dried apples, berries, beans, corn, herbs, squash, and other produce that could later be soaked, boiled, ground, or added to simple meals. Flour, cornmeal, oats, rice, beans, salt, sugar, coffee, tea, and molasses were purchased or produced whenever the household could afford them. Milk was transformed into butter or cheese, while eggs were preserved through methods intended to extend their usefulness beyond the productive season. Every container needed inspection because insects, rodents, dampness, mold, broken seals, or unexpected warmth could destroy supplies silently. Families kept seed grains separate from ordinary food, knowing that eating it during winter might save them immediately but leave nothing to plant in spring. Successful preservation required knowledge accumulated through experience, family tradition, local conditions, indigenous practices, and exchanges among neighboring households. By the time snow covered the fields, the pantry represented months of invisible labor and the family's best estimate of how long winter might last. Winter meals were usually repetitive because families relied upon foods capable of surviving storage rather than ingredients chosen for variety. Breakfast might include porridge, bread, corn cakes, potatoes, preserved meat, or leftovers warmed beside the morning fire. Beans, dried vegetables, salted pork, soups, stews, and grain-based dishes stretched limited ingredients across large households. A single pot could remain near the fire for hours, as new water, vegetables, scraps, and seasonings were added whenever available. Fresh meat sometimes came from hunting or slaughtered livestock, but storms, ammunition costs, game shortages, and dangerous travel made hunting unreliable. Families reduced portions when supplies declined, often protecting food for young children, while adults accepted smaller meals. Milk, eggs, or fresh vegetables became scarce when animals stopped producing and gardens disappeared beneath frozen ground. Nutritional deficiencies weakened resistance to illness, slowed recovery, and made ordinary cold feel more exhausting as winter continued. Special foods were reserved for holidays, visitors, childbirth, illness, or moments when the family needed comfort as much as nourishment. A warm meal did more than satisfy hunger because it gathered the household around the fire and restored a temporary sense of safety. Horses, oxen, cattle, sheep, pigs, and chickens were essential forms of transportation, labor, food, income, and future security. A family that lost its animals during winter could survive the season and still find itself unable to plant crops or recover financially in spring. Barns and sheds protected livestock from wind and snow, although newly settled families did not always possess enough time or materials to build them properly. Historical accounts describe desperate moments when valuable animals were brought into cabins because no other shelter could keep them alive. Hay had to be cut and stored during summer, while grain, straw, corn stalks, and other feed supplemented animals when grazing became impossible. Deep or hardened snow prevented cattle from reaching grass and forced families to carry feed through freezing conditions several times each day. Water troughs froze repeatedly, requiring someone to break the ice or transport warmed water from the house. Animals crowded inside poorly ventilated shelters faced disease, while damp bedding and accumulated waste created additional labor and health risks. A blizzard could scatter livestock, bury smaller animals, collapse weak roofs, or leave a farmer unable to reach the barn safely. Caring for animals consumed precious food, fuel, and energy, but abandoning them could destroy the household's ability to begin again. Winter clothing was valuable because every garment required purchased fabric, processed wool, animal hides, skilled labor, or many hours of household production. Families wore multiple layers that trapped warm air and could be adjusted during work, travel, or sudden changes in temperature. Wool remained especially useful because it provided insulation even when damp, although good wool clothing was not available to every household. Coats, shawls, mittens, caps, scarves, stockings, boots, and blankets were repaired repeatedly rather than discarded when worn. Women and older children spent long winter hours spinning, knitting, weaving, quilting, sewing, and patching clothing for the entire family. Shoes created particular difficulty because wet leather stiffened, cracked, and offered limited warmth when people remained outdoors for extended periods. Families stuffed boots with cloth, straw, paper, or other material to improve insulation during necessary journeys. Children often received altered garments previously worn by older siblings, leaving little fabric unused as the household grew. Wet clothing was dried near the fire, where sparks and excessive heat could damage the same garments the family depended upon. Warm clothing did not eliminate danger, but it increased the time a person could work outside before cold began weakening hands, feet, judgment, and movement. Winter reduced agricultural work in the fields, but it did not bring the long period of rest sometimes imagined in nostalgic frontier stories. Animals needed feeding, fires required fuel, meals demanded preparation, water had to be carried, and snow repeatedly blocked doors, paths, and roofs. Men repaired harnesses, sharpened tools, shaped wood, mended buildings, processed meat, and prepared equipment for the next planting season. Women cooked, cleaned, washed, preserved remaining food, made clothing, cared for children, tended illness, and managed supplies that could not be replaced easily. Children collected kindling, carried water, watched younger siblings, fed small animals, swept floors, and helped with whatever their age allowed. Laundry remained exhausting because water had to be carried and heated before wet clothing could be dried without freezing. Ice was sometimes collected and stored for warmer months, while snow could provide water when wells became difficult to reach. Each trip outside required preparation because a minor task could become dangerous when wind, darkness, or rapidly drifting snow reduced visibility. Indoor work filled the evening by firelight, allowing the family to repair possessions while conserving materials and preparing for spring. Survival emerged from these small duties, repeated faithfully even when no one felt rested, hopeful, warm, or strong. A severe blizzard could transform a familiar homestead into an unrecognizable white landscape within a remarkably short period. Powerful wind drove snow through cracks, erased paths, concealed fences, and formed drifts higher than doors, windows, and small outbuildings. A person caught outside could lose sight of the cabin even when standing only a short distance from safety. Families sometimes stretched ropes between the house and barn so they could follow a physical guide when blowing snow made vision useless. Travelers who became disoriented walked in circles, collapsed from exhaustion, or froze before reaching shelter that might have been nearby. Inside the cabin, residents listened to the wind while checking fuel, sealing openings, and wondering whether animals and neighbors had survived. Snow could block chimneys or ventilation, increasing the danger of smoke and harmful gases accumulating within the shelter. Weak roofs required attention because the weight of snow could damage or collapse structures already strained by poor construction. After the storm, families dug through drifts, searched for animals, reopened paths, inspected buildings, and assessed the supplies they had lost. The blizzard might last only a day, but its consequences could shape every remaining week before spring. Winter illness became especially frightening when snow closed roads and placed trained medical assistants many hours or days away. Families treated common problems with rest, warmth, herbal preparations, familiar remedies, religious faith, and knowledge passed between generations. Some treatments offered comfort or genuine benefit, while others were ineffective, toxic, or based upon incorrect ideas about the body. Respiratory infections spread easily when families remained close together inside poorly ventilated cabins for long periods. A sick person required additional fuel, food, water, clean bedding, and attention from someone whose normal work still needed to be completed. Childbirth could become a household emergency when storms prevented an experienced midwife or neighbor from reaching the mother. Cuts, burns, frostbite, broken bones, and animal injuries became more serious without antiseptics, antibiotics, reliable pain control, or hospital care. Mental health also suffered as darkness, isolation, grief, monotonous work, hunger, and fear continued month after month. Music, prayer, reading, storytelling, letters, games, and conversation helped families protect emotional endurance during long evenings. When medicine was limited, survival often depended upon careful nursing, community knowledge, physical resilience, and fortune. The popular image of a completely self-sufficient pioneer hides how often survival depended upon neighbors and established communities. Families shared food, tools, livestock, shelter, labor, medical knowledge, news, and transportation when one household faced an emergency. A neighbor might help repair a roof, deliver a child, search for a missing traveler, cut fuel, or care for animals during illness. Community gatherings allowed residents to exchange information about weather, roads, food supplies, disease, and families needing assistance. Settlers also relied upon knowledge developed by indigenous peoples and earlier inhabitants who understood local plants, animals, roots, weather, and building methods. These exchanges occurred within a broader history of land seizure, broken agreements, displacement, violence, and unequal power. Frontier cooperation did not erase conflict or prejudice, but isolation made practical interdependence impossible to ignore. Refusing help during a crisis could endanger an entire family, while offering assistance created relationships that might later return the same protection. Churches, forts, trading posts, mills, and small settlements could become centers of relief during particularly severe seasons. The strongest household was often not the one standing alone, but the one connected to a community willing to respond. For pioneer children, winter combined moments of play and family closeness with work, discomfort, isolation, and genuine danger. They created games from household objects, carved toys, dolls, balls, buttons, string, snow, and whatever materials adults could spare. Stories told beside the fire carried family history, folklore, humor, religious instruction, and memories of places left behind. When a school operated nearby, children might walk through snow and dangerous cold to study in a one-room building heated by a stove. Older students helped younger ones, while a single teacher managed different ages, abilities, books, and lessons within the same room. Some children stayed home when storms, distance, illness, inadequate clothing, or necessary household work made attendance impossible. They learned practical skills early because survival required them to care for animals, collect fuel, prepare food, sew, repair, and watch siblings. Children also absorbed the anxiety of adults when food ran low, animals became sick, or storms continued longer than expected. Deaths among infants and children brought grief that could remain with a family long after the cabin and homestead were abandoned. Yet children also remembered warmth, games, celebrations, and stories, showing that hardship did not erase every experience of comfort or joy. The most dangerous stage of winter often arrived near its end, when stored food, animal feed, fuel, candles, medicine, and patience were nearly exhausted. A family could see warmer light returning while remaining separated from the first edible plants and dependable travel by several difficult weeks. Portions became smaller, meals became simpler, and anything still safe to eat received careful consideration before being discarded. Seed grain tempted hungry households, although consuming it threatened the crop upon which survival during the following year depended. Furniture, fences, stored lumber, and damaged tools could become fuel when the woodpile disappeared beneath repeated storms. Livestock might be slaughtered to preserve human life, sacrificing future milk, transportation, breeding, income, and farm labor. Families traded valued possessions for food when a neighbor or merchant possessed supplies that could be spared. Anyone strong enough to travel faced a difficult calculation between the danger of remaining and the danger of seeking assistance. A brief thaw could create false hope before another freeze sealed roads, damaged crops, and exhausted, weakened animals. Late winter tested not merely how much a family had stored, but how intelligently it could adapt when every original plan began to fail. Spring rarely arrived at once, because warm afternoons alternated with frozen nights, wet snow, cold rain, and sudden returns of winter weather. Melting drifts revealed damaged fences, collapsed roofs, dead animals, scattered equipment, and the muddy remains of months spent indoors. Rivers and streams rose with snowmelt, making travel dangerous just when isolated families were eager to reconnect with neighbors and markets. The first green plants provided psychological relief and, in some places, fresh food after a winter dominated by preserved ingredients. Animals returning to pasture reduced the burden on stored feed, although weakened livestock required careful attention before recovering. Families opened cabins to fresh air, repaired roofs, cleaned soot, emptied bedding, removed waste, and assessed damage hidden by snow. Fields had to be prepared quickly because planting could not wait for residents to recover completely from winter exhaustion. Seeds saved through hunger were placed into uncertain soil with the hope that another harvest would rebuild the household's supplies. Spring confirmed survival, but it also revealed debts, losses, illnesses, and repairs that would shape the entire working season ahead. The family had endured winter, yet the cycle of preparation for the next one had already begun. Pioneer winter survival was not a simple story of strong individuals conquering nature through courage and determination. It depended upon adequate land, useful knowledge, preserved food, shelter, fuel, healthy animals, community support, and access to resources not every family possessed. Wealthier settlers could purchase better tools, stoves, clothing, medicine, livestock, and replacement supplies when poorer families had few alternatives. Indigenous communities had survived regional winters for generations through sophisticated knowledge, although expanding settlement frequently disrupted their lands and food systems. Women's domestic labor preserved food, clothing, health, children, and household order, yet traditional histories often treated that work as secondary. Children and older relatives also contributed according to their abilities, making winter survival a shared household achievement rather than the work of one heroic pioneer. Some families survived because they prepared well, while others endured because neighbors intervened or the weather changed before supplies disappeared. Still others lost homes, animals, health, relatives, or their own lives, despite making decisions that appeared reasonable at the time. The real lesson of the pioneer winter is not that hardship always rewards determination, but that human survival depends upon preparation, adaptation, connection, and chance. As the final snow melts beside the cabin, we leave the frontier remembering every quiet task that carried a family from darkness into spring.